Hey everyone, this is the Black Manga Critic here with another video for the channel. And today, I know today is Saturday, and I don't necessarily do videos on Saturdays unless something particularly popular has come out. But I didn't do a Fantastic Friday video yesterday because I was exhausted from work. So I'm doing it today. I'm getting it to you guys as quickly as I can. And like I said in a couple of other videos before this one, today we're going to be reviewing and analyzing Bitch Planet Volume 2. And man, what an incredible volume. I mean, I thought the first volume of Bitch Planet was awesome. You know, because DeConnick does such a great thing, just such great things with talking about feminism, intersectional feminism, the patriarchy, things of that nature. And Volume 2 just keeps on, chugging along. And maybe not just, maybe it doesn't just keep on chugging along, but it's a stronger sort of chug, right? I mean, like, this train is coming on full blast, and then bam, explosion. And that's sort of like a reference to the last splash panel of the volume. So this video isn't going to be spoiler-free because I don't necessarily believe in spoiler-free videos. I think they're sort of a waste of time because there's certain things that you can't really say about a movie or a text or something like that without getting into certain things that kind of already are sort of spoiler-esque. So, if you want to stop here because it's going to be because it's not going to be a spoiler-free video, I guess I would say that it's a great, like I said, it's a great volume. A lot of things happen, really impactful things happen, and that's it. So to get into the characters of the volume that are pretty noteworthy in terms of big events and things of that nature and themes that DeConnick is trying to go into, I guess I would say, Cam, obviously. We get introduced to Cam's sister, Mo. We get introduced, we have a bit more, we know a bit more about some other characters, including Kylie, Father Josephson's daughter, Mako's dad in the flashback, and also in the present. And last but not least, Eleanor Doan, who is apparently the former and probably the first black woman president of the United States, right? They say of the free world, but really they mean the president of the United States. Unless something extraordinary happened and the United States took over the world in some weird, post-colonial takeover, imperial takeover, whatever. But I'm pretty sure it's the United States. Oh, and I also forgot that Special Guard Whitney is also pretty important to the plot and the story going forward, moving into Volume 2. So I didn't want to forget her because she is a white lady and she's a problematic white lady, but she's important to how the story moves forward and how she affects certain characters and how certain events affect her in that sense. So Volume 2, really starts off not with a bang, but really just with sort of a quiet but very intense flashback going into the character Mako and into Mako's father and their family and the family dynamic that existed prior to Mako's imprisonment. So I think what's really interesting about this is that it really sort of showcases how DeConnick is very intent on relating the fact that these dangers, such as death, prison rape, sexual assault, these types of things, and just general shittiness in terms of the patriarchy, right, are ever present not only in the prison or prisons, but within just the everyday sort of world, right? I mean, what we get here is a really poignant critique of just how even the best sort of family dynamics can be infiltrated by a douchey and very dangerous and horrible white male, right? So before we get introduced to this white male, we do understand that Mako is a good. Mako's dad is a good person, but he's also a bit of a revolutionary, right? And I wouldn't call him a terrorist in the sense of because I think that the Protectorate is a terrible country and institution and things of that nature, and like it should be, you know, taken down. So I see him as a revolutionary and not necessarily a terrorist. But we do see that he's trying to, you know, set up the architecture of the building that he's working on, so that at some point a massive explosion would occur, and you know, maybe everyone dies, everyone that's working there dies, but he's willing to do that because he so badly wants change. And we do understand that he wants change, but you know, but we don't understand how badly he wants it. Even while he's sort of planning this stuff, we only sort of see that later on in the volume. But we also see that you know, he's having a hard time being trying to be an intersectional feminist ally, right, as a guy, but you know, also trying to provide for his family in this space, right? And that's something that I think like most you know, men and white women and women of color and all these people are trying to sort of grapple with, right, in our everyday lives. We're trying to sort of say, okay, well, how do I fight this patriarchal capitalist society without, you know, sort of adding to the cog or the cogs that do run this patriarchal capitalist society. So that's something I think DeConnick is really sort of showing that, you know, if you really want to sort of be able to do something, at least like in this hyperbolic comic world, you really have to just like blow things up literally. And it's also really interesting that I want to say Mako's the fact that Mako's dad and his decisions really sort of have a domino effect throughout the volume, right? We at least in terms of Mako's narrative and Mako's dad's narrative throughout the volume, right? We see that, you know, in the flashback, his boss, who is this horrible white male, heteronormative white male, you know, pedophile and fetishizer of Japanese culture, you know. So we already know that, you know, once we sort of see the fetishization of that Japanese culture, we sort of get a sense that like this guy's going to be a very big problem, right? Because I think like when you see stories where individuals sort of are on like a very extreme sort of part of the spectrum, at least where comics and certain narratives like that are involved, you know that, okay, shit's about to go down, this guy makes you uncomfortable, and we have to watch out for what comes next. So eventually we do realize that this guy is actively trying to you know, marry and marry the one of the daughters, but you also realize that like he's pretty much like a rapist, or well, yeah, he's a rapist. I mean, like attempted rape, you know, still makes you a rapist. It doesn't mean, you know, that you're not you know, someone who isn't guilty of sexual assault or anything like that. I mean, you're still a disgusting individual who's trying to do these things to children, right? So he's a horrible human being. But we do understand that once Mako's dad is found out in terms of his sort of revolutionary scheme, right? That's sort of the domino effect that leads to everything else that's about to happen, right? That's not to say that Mako's dad is responsible for the attempted rape and Mako's killing of her attempted rapist, right? But it does mean that even as Mako's dad is trying to, you know, provide for their family, I mean, like, shit's going to hit the fan, because even if you have an inkling of, you know, support for women and all, you know, and all women, right? That's going to screw you over in some shape or form, right? We saw that, right, in volume 1, where, you know, even the smallest micro sort of aggressions lead to you know, massive events, right? Penelope losing her shop and her livelihood because, you know, she couldn't deal with, you know, the asshole guys who were saying all these horrible things. So we do kind of see that Mako's father trying to start sort of a revolution and try to do a revolutionary act inadvertently causes this white male horrible character. I'm not going to name this guy. I'm just going to keep calling him horrible white male character. Okay, so don't worry about that. I think I know his name, but I don't really care about what his name is. But we do know that, right, the white male character allows himself into their home because he understands that he has a certain power, right? Above Mako's father, right? Because that, like, he's his boss. So he just invites himself over, and that leads to him trying to sort of move in, right? To really just kind of like scope out his who he believes is going to be his next victim or victims, right? So once the white male character has moved in on Mako's family and later on to Mako, right? We see that, okay, something's gonna have to happen here, because if Mako doesn't defend herself, right, most likely she's going to be raped by this white male character, and that's going to be a horrible thing that, right, would clearly color the narrative and color her character throughout Bitch Planet. But I think what I love about Bitch Planet is the ways in which DeConnick is constantly sort of rewriting these narratives that we often see in sort of other media outlets, right? Like, a lot of TV shows, novels, things of that nature have no problem just depicting rape as sort of like a plot device or something like that. But here, DeConnick is saying, no, like, women have agency, women have power, and they can defend themselves. And Mako kills this guy. I mean, she just says, okay, like, this is like, I gotta formulate a plan as quickly as possible inside my head, and that's what she does, and she just destroys this guy. And it's one of those moments where it's like, just like a breath of fresh air, but also the air is not necessarily fresh because we realize that she just sort of survived a rape attempt and that she's going to be imprisoned. So later on in the volume, we do see that Mako's dad is still working very much so within the patriarchy. We don't necessarily know if he's trying to evoke change or anything like that, but we do realize that clearly, right? Like we saw that in Volume 1, he's clearly still, grief-stricken over sort of what he sort of perceives to be the loss of his daughter, right? Because she's been imprisoned, and I mean, it's pretty obvious that, like, once you've been imprisoned on another planet in a fictional world, it's going to be very difficult for anyone on the planet that you came from to see you again, right? Like, she's, we understand that she's screwed, not only because, like she died at the hands of the prison guard, but we understand that, prison is almost as bad as death in a certain way, right? So when Mako's dad does try to see Mako, right, we already know that she's dead. There's a sort of dramatic irony that goes on, right? We already know that she's dead, but it doesn't make Mako's dad any less relevant or important in terms of the narrative, in terms of what is going to happen, in terms of the revolution that we hope will occur within Bitch Planet, right? Within the story of that is Bitch Planet, right? Mako's dad is building this building for I forgot what the game is called, but I don't really care because, like, it's a horrible game. It's violent. It's sort of a hyperbole on all sort of sports that are particularly violent, right? But we do understand that Mako's dad is sort of heading the project in terms of building a field on Bitch Planet so that all of the prisoners can compete, right? And this is essentially what allows Mako's dad to commit his revolutionary act, right? It's always interesting that, like, the sort of oppressive power that is trying to maintain their power ultimately commits an act that allows the oppressed to take not necessarily take over, but to fight, right? And to have a poignant fight. And really, it's this act that, right, the fact that we're going to have a sort of televised match between the prisoners, right? It's really this event that allows all of the revolutionary acts to happen throughout Volume 2, right? So to kind of move on from Mako's father a little bit quickly, we do understand that Mako's dad releases the prisoners eventually, right, out of their cells. And that's huge because like crazy shit's about to go down, right? We understand that, Cam is going to be able to look for her sister in earnest. We see that Eleanor Doan, the former leader of the free world, right, is still alive. We don't necessarily even know if she's dead or alive necessarily in the first volume, but we do understand that now we do understand that she's alive, right? And that's huge because she is clearly an important figure in the likes of sort of, I want to say, an Angela Davis, a Toni Morrison, individuals like that who are clearly sort of, activists and, proponents of intersectional feminism, right? So when we see Cam eventually find her sister, it's a really like, sort of heartwarming moment because we understand that, in a general sense, right, like both in this comic world, but also in reality, that like if you're going to evoke change, you need people, right? Like you're not going to do that by yourself, unless you want to plan to blow up a building. But even then, Mako's dad would need, right, like the people that are building the building, individuals that would sign off on the plan, who would also be in on the Revolutionary Act, things of that nature. So Cam finding Mo is really powerful because now Cam doesn't feel alone in her revolutionary acts, right? Like in the fact that, okay, maybe we can actually get out of here because I found my sister. There's a certain strength that comes from family who are sort of on the same page as far as certain politics go and things of that nature. And when we see that splash page near the end of Volume 2, that's when we really see just how powerful this duo is, right? Eleanor Doan is about to be killed by some, scrub, no-name guard, and probably another white male, right? We don't give a shit about this guard, but we do give a shit about Eleanor Doan, right? Because she, even more so than Cam and Mo together, Eleanor Doan is a really, really important and powerful symbol, right? Of intersectional feminism, of the ability to evoke change at a high political level, right? All of these things, right? And a symbol of being able to still be strong through imprisonment. So when Cam and Mo do save Eleanor Doan, it's really sort of a sort of ripple effect that happens through the comic, right? Because we understand that now, like, man, like this is going to be an amazing thing. Change is going to be evoked maybe within the third volume, and then we sort of switch right off to the actual event that's going to happen, right? In terms of we switch off to a game that's happening on planet Earth. I'm assuming. I don't know if if the planet is Earth, but it's a Earth sort of type planet, right? Everyone's pretty much like a human and things of that nature. So once we switch off there, we see Kylie's just chilling. She's looking at her watch, and we understand that once we see the watch, and then we see the group that follows Eleanor Doan sort of doctrines and things of that nature, right? We see that she's actually part of that revolutionary group, and that's important because DeConnick is sort of saying, hey, like if you are a white woman at any level, but particularly if you are an extremely privileged white woman, you need to do everything in your power to upend the patriarchy, right? And that's something that Kylie is doing. We don't see her speak very much. We don't see her say very much, because in that way, DeConnick sort of depicts her as someone that is, as a character that only does what needs to be done to upend the patriarchy, right? If to upend the patriarchy, right? If she's talking and saying, "Ha ha, I'm having a good time," either she's doing particular things to sort of deflect from her revolutionary status, right? Or she's actually having a good time in this patriarchy. And it's very clear that she doesn't, because every time her parents speak to her, and every time they're talking about particular things that are very sort of like disgusting, right? She's just silent, right? We see the ellipses on every sort of panel going down. And so we understand that, okay, her focus is on her mission, right? To kill High Father Johnson. And High Father Johnson is like, he's like the guy, right? Like he probably sees himself as God, right? Of course, a lot of white males do see themselves as God. So it's very, so that's also very telling that DeConnick is sort of saying, right, of course, like the leader of the free world, right, would be a white male, right? So the fact that Kylie is the one to kill High Father Johnson is very telling. One, because it means that there is such a state of oppression, right? That is pervasive throughout the free world, right? That it takes an extremely privileged white lady to try to upend that, right? I mean, like she obviously has help from women of color, right? But the fact that she's the one that has to sort of commit this act is really sort of kind of like almost a penance of sorts, right? The fact that like, okay, like if anyone's going to kill an individual, it's going to be white lady, and if anyone is going to do a certain amount of work, right, a certain amount of dirty work that goes into upending the patriarchy, it has to be white women, right? Because like they have the resources and they have the power to one, commit an act, right, a revolutionary act, but also to like make sure that that act has some sort of effect. That's not to say that, right, like women of color, right, don't have that power, but it's very clear that women of color can do it by themselves, right? But it would take far longer if they were doing it by themselves, right? So DeConnick is sort of saying that, hey, white women, you got to step up, right? And right, and DeConnick's clearly stepping up with the comic bitch planet, and there's sort of like a meta narrative, a meta textual sort of thing that's going on there. I guess meta narrative, but yeah. But I guess sort of the next thing that I kind of want to talk about in terms of moving, talking about like white women and sort of their roles within Bitch Planet, right? At least within Volume 2, right? We see sort of Special Guard Whitney. She's essentially screwed, right? Because the patriarchy has sort of said like, you are not useful to us now. You are very much so useless because for whatever reason they need her to be the patsy in terms of the for the death of Mako, right? And the patriarchy is very, and in this sense, right, it sort of says that like, it's sort of a message to white women is to sort of say like, hey, the patriarchy only cares about you so much as you're trying to maintain the patriarchy, right? So Whitney is not really maintaining the patriarchy in the way that the patriarchy wants her to maintain it, right? She sort of goes off script. And the second that she goes off script, like, and we've seen this in Volume 1, right? The second you go off script as a woman, right, your life is pretty much over, or it's going to be close to it. So she ends up being in prison, right? She ends up being in prison, right, for this, and that's important. And that's important because it sort of allows us to see that, hey, like there are levels to this thing that's called privilege, right? Like certain people have a certain amount of privilege, but only until that person at the higher up, right, which is usually a male, if not all the time, right, says that, hey, like we don't need you anymore. So again, we see that, and again we see that when Whitney is thrown off the rails after the prison uprising, right? She's thrown off the rails. She's, we pretty much realize that like she's either dead or she is going to die fairly soon. But we understand that the only moment where she seems to be particularly helpful is when she feels like she might actually die, right? At that point, she's like, oh, like, my life is sort of forfeit to the sense I'm probably not going to live, so at the very least, I can be an ally in death. But that's also a message that sort of says that, the fact that a white woman in this narrative, and everybody, like at least one of the white men in this narrative is like, needs to be near death to do some sort of work to upend the patriarchy, right? Like that's that's ridiculous, right? I mean, like if anything, you should like white women should just be doing work while they're alive. And while I understand that this world is very much so hyperbolic, right, in certain ways, right, DeConnick is sort of saying that even the hyperbole isn't so exaggerated, right? Like it's not like, I mean, if we look at, you know, the political milieu of our United States, right, and even in other countries, right, we see that, I mean, shit is really hitting the fan. Like there is like like the fact that, you know, we have let's say Donald, like right, like the Donald Trump is the president of the United States, right? We saw that French election where we had another sort of Donald Trump candidate might have been elected. I mean, that was like, I mean, shit was ridiculous. Like shit is ridiculous, right? And shit is going to continue being ridiculous until, right, privileged individuals exercise the power that they have to do, right, revolutionary good. So I guess lastly, I want to talk about DeConnick's sort of conversation about trans rights, right? And that's important because you can't sort of like gloss over that, right? Like, I mean, I think one thing, I mean, just even, you know, in my own life, like I have tons of trans friends, right, who are fighting every day just to, you know, be able to go use the bathroom like whenever they want, right? I mean, like it's gotten to a point where, I mean, right, you see dead trans bodies in the streets, you know, either beaten to death or shot to death or any other sorts of you know, types of assault, right? But it's gotten to a point where, I mean, it is dangerous for trans people and trans people of color just to walk in the street, right? And that and DeConnick sort of alludes to that by talking about the fact that when the sort of protectorate sort of came into power, the first people that they went after were trans people and probably trans people of color. But I mean, trans people in general, right? Like they went after them first because they probably deemed them a threat in like the most ridiculous sense, right? I mean, if we don't understand something, we deem it like, right, we deem it a threat in like in the most heteronormative sense, right? And the fact of the matter is, even though trans like the lives of trans people are complex in, right, the way that they see the world, the way that they interact with the world, right? We understand that complexity, but there's a simplicity in just acknowledging that trans people exist, right? And they have a right to live, and they have a right to, right, all these sort of inalienable rights that, you know, these hotshot politicians are, you know, constantly throwing out, right? So that's like that. It's just a basic thing, but we understand that like it seems like they've separated the prison so that we have the trans woman, right, and trans woman of color within one prison, and you know what I guess the patriarchy has deemed to be bodily heteronormative, right, in over in another prison. I mean, but even that, like, it's just so ridiculous. I mean, like, the, like, lengths to which the patriarchy is willing to go within Bitch Planet, right? The lengths to which they're willing to go to keep these things separate. So even when, right, both heteronormative women and trans women, all right, are going to be imprisoned, we have to keep them, like, right, like, we have to keep them separate because bad shit might happen. I mean, like, it's just it's such a dumb thing, but I'm glad that DeConnick sort of shows that, because like the extent of that really portrays the ridiculousness of heteronormative patriarchy, right? So when we see the Special Guard Whitney constantly calling Cam's sister Mo, Cam's brother, it's just really like it's just like she can just continue to like dig into you, right? Like, I mean, like if you have sort of like any sort of like ounce of like, you know, human like decency, like, you know, that shit like it hits you, right? And I mean, if you you know, and if you're let's say like if I had a trans sibling, like, I'd probably be just as angry as Cam. Like, I'd be like, hey, like, my trans sibling has asked to be acknowledged as such, and like, you need to like stop fucking doing that shit, right? And so there's a point where where Special Guard Whitney does eventually call Cam's sister, but it's sort of like glib and and sort of in jest, right? And like that's a sort of microaggression that happens all the time. I see it all the time, right? And in that sense, right, like, you really have to sort of work to make sure that if you see stuff like that happen, right, outside of like this bitch planet environment, right, like in our reality, like, you should be able to sort of say, like, to tell a person who's saying such a horrible thing and totally disregarding the identity of a trans woman or a trans woman of color, you need to say, hey, like, stop doing that shit. So I guess that's all I wanted to say in terms of the volume and what the volume sort of does well in terms of story. And I guess if I wanted to say some quick things about the art, I really loved both splash pages, like the sort of body language that was invoked in both splash pages really showed that, like, it's not just about like what you say, right? It's what you do, and it's the actions that you do, right? And in that way, like, activism, it is about action, right? Not just verbal action, but like, like bodily action. Where are you going to be? What are you going to do once you're there? And what lengths are you willing to go to evoke change? And I think like those two splash pages do a really good job of it, because in one of the splash pages, I think that's the last page of the volume, Kylie just shoots the shit out of High Father Johnson, right? She shoots the shit out of him. She doesn't say nothing. Like, as she's shooting him, but she says a little bit before. But what's important is her act, right? And that splash shows that. And then the other splash with Cam and Mo walking, and Cam sort of saying like, hey, like, it's great to make your acquaintance, Eleanor Doan. And it's like, it's an amazing thing, right? Because it's not just about the fact that she's, pleased to make her acquaintance, like, pleased to make Eleanor's acquaintance. It's the fact that she's just saved the former, probably first, black woman president of the United States, right? Like, that's a huge deal, and it shows, like, and that sort of symbolizes, right, like that we all got to be together, like, we all sort of have to come together to be able to evoke the change that we want to evoke. So I think, like, another thing that I wanted to sort of say in terms of the art, there was one page, I want to say maybe in issue 8, maybe, of within volume 2, or issue 7. I want to say maybe issue 7. There's a point where we realize that Whitney is going to be Cam's cellmate, and there's a way in which, like, the panels are kind of like pixelated in a sense, like, and like, like, they're like really large panels, but like they're like sort of like they're like pixel panels that separate Cam's face, and I think, like, in that way, it's a really cool metaphor to sort of show her confusion, right? Because it's like, why is she my cellmate? But also there were like there are feelings of, why is she my cellmate? Why can't I kill her where she stands? How can I use her to help me find my sister? Why did she let Mako die? Why did she invoke the act? Like, things of that nature, right? And like, all these things I think are running through Cam's mind, and it's just a really great job by the artist, by Valentine Landro, right? So, like, I mean, just top-notch work, right? I mean, like, the body language in this volume was great. Splash pages were great. That pixel part of the of issue 7 within volume 2, that was awesome. Like, I really appreciated that. Like, it was just a really great uses of panels. So that's it for my review and analysis of volume 2 of Bitch Planet volume 2. If you like this review, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And for next Fantastic Friday, I'm probably going to be reviewing issue, well, not an issue, a volume of like a volume of a comic book. I'm not necessarily sure which one I'm going to look at next, but maybe if you guys have any suggestions in terms of things that I should be reading, maybe I'll pick one of those and I'll review it this upcoming Friday. So I'm the Black Manga Critic, and bye-bye!